All right, so we've gotten through first start on the Cobra, and like I mentioned, I did first start right before I had to have surgery, and so then I'm spending several days or a week or so sitting around recovering, and so I spent a lot of time watching videos, spent a lot of time watching Engine Masters, which if you haven't checked it out, it's a really cool series on Motor Trend TV. And so, you know, just between that and also in general thinking about, I'm 2.5 years in to this project. I've made all the decisions that I did for different reasons. And just to be clear, I'm not going to go and change anything now, but there's always that question of what are you second guessing and why? So I'll be honest, most of it's surrounding the engine. So I was second guessing the idea of going with EFI and the distributorless ignition for a while I was going through it. That was really because of how much extra time, and when I say time, I really mean calendar time, it added to the project. There was a lot that I had to do with getting the EFI working, fabricating the harness, going through all of that. The ignition especially, fabricating mounts for the coils, figuring out what the wiring was going to have to look like, making the wiring harness for that, custom ordering a balancer that had to come all the way from Australia, going through probably 20 different crank sensors to find one that was going to be close enough, and getting all of that. That was a whole lot of effort. Hearing the engine start for the first time, and now looking and seeing at how easy it's going to be to tune and calibrate and all of that, which of course I knew that was going to be the case, but seeing how well everything worked the first time, don't regret that at all anymore. That was something that, you know, my regrets were really around calendar. Second guessing, so additional second guessing, I'll say the camshaft is something I'm wondering about. And so it's an ISKI solid flat tappet cam. It's a 381333. You can take a look at that for the specs if you want, but it's kind of a smaller cam. Listed in their specs is 2,000 to 6,000 RPM, but I think that's really more intended around a 302. They make another one that's a 333368, I believe, that has the same lift at 476, and but it's higher duration. It's 250 degrees intake and exhaust at 50 as opposed to 228 degrees. And the reason I went with the smaller cam was that this is a stock 351. I really don't want it going above 6,000 or 6,500. And I thought the smaller cam with the 1.7 to 1 rockers that I had, you know, that lift and duration is at with a 1.6 rocker, which is standard on Fords. And then also I thought between that and then doing what ISKI recommended of tightening the lash a little bit to get some more lift and some more duration for a cam that was maybe a bit undersized would help. I'm wondering if that's going to be the case, or if I'm going to wish that I had gotten the bigger cam. I'm definitely not regretting the lobe centerline angle at this point, or lobe separation angle of 108 degrees. I love the way this thing sounds at idle, and that was part of what I was going for. But I am wondering if I would have been better off with the bigger cam. I'm not going to know until I drive it. And I had my reasons for choosing that. They all made sense, but we'll see. Electric water pump, that was something that I had chosen, and I think that was a good one overall. But we'll see what happens. Part of why I chose the electric water pump was because, one, I've never had it before, never used one before, but another one was because I wanted to see what, I wanted to try to have as little rotating inertia as possible. So what's interesting with that is, of course, the electric water pump is not connected to the crankshaft, so, you know, when I'm trying to get that real snappy response, it's not going to have to accelerate that. At the same time, it is drawing a constant amount of power from the alternator, and that constant power is, you know, it's a horsepower. It's basically always running like a mechanical water pump at high RPM. So is that going to offset the lack of rotational mass that needs to get accelerated? I don't know. It's still kind of a cool thing to have. Never had dealt with one before. It's still what I wanted, but I'm sort of wondering now if that's going to work the way that I had intended it in that regard. Heating and air conditioning, this one I think is going to be a whole lot like the EFI and ignition. I think right now I'm questioning it because of all of the extra effort that it has taken, and it's also going to make my windshield wipers a whole lot harder to install. That's another one I'm semi-questioning as well, but I think, again, like the EFI and ignition, I think once I get further along in it and get it completed, I think I'm going to be glad I did it. Probably the last two that I'm wondering about is also the engine and the transmission. So this is a 351. Originally I planned on doing a 302 based engine. I was probably thinking a 331. I went with the 351 because I was going to be able to get it ultimately a lot cheaper, and I figured that the performance was going to be better. Well, I knew I was going to make more power, but the value was definitely a better proposition with the 351 versus if I did a 331. But this adds 50 pounds, so I'm really wondering that with my goals of this car of trying to have it be as lightweight as possible, especially as light in the front as possible, if this is really the right decision. I have nothing to compare it to, and so really it's going to be a question of just how it feels when I start driving it. And I think in the end it will probably be just fine. But this is something I'm probably wondering about, and while I'm not going to change it now, if I was going to do this over again, I might have worked a little bit harder and spent a little bit of extra money to get something that was a 302 based block instead of a 351 based block. It also would have had a lighter weight rotating assembly, just because the 351 crank is bigger and heavier, and that probably would have helped a little bit more with my goal of something super snappy and responsive. Similarly, the TKO transmission, I bought it because I got a great deal on it, and TKOs are basically bulletproof, but that adds about 30 pounds versus a T5. So, you know, if you take a look at what would have been the ideal for what I was going for, something 302 based with a T5, granted both upgraded to handle some extra power, that probably would have gotten me my goal more exactly. So those are some of the things I'm second guessing. Not going to change anything, but just some food for thought for you as you're working through a project like this and making the design decisions. I think the last one I'm sort of wondering about is I put 373 gears in, and part of the reason I did that was because I wanted something that was going to be, I knew the engine wasn't going to be super high revving, but I thought I was going to want to have a little bit more revs here out of it. And with the overlap especially, you tend to not have the best lower RPM quality. So I'm starting to wonder if I should have gone with 411s, but I think with the smaller cam versus that I was mentioning earlier, I think it will be fine. So you can think about these, and then you can also see once I start driving it, this is done, talking about hindsight, what would I have done differently. So hope you enjoyed this. Thanks.